My boss stole my work for years, so I planted something in my report that would blow up in his face. I should have seen it coming when Broderick hired me. Fresh out of college with a data analytics degree, I was thrilled to land a position at Meridian Financial. "You're exactly what this department needs," Broderick said, his smile too wide. Fresh perspective, innovative thinking. For 6 months, everything seemed perfect. I'd submit weekly reports, market analysis, trend predictions, risk assessments, and Broderick would praise my thoroughness. "Exceptional work, Quinlan," he'd say. Then I started noticing things. During meetings, Broderick would present his insights that sounded remarkably familiar. Numbers I'd crunched, patterns I'd identified, recommendations I'd spent weeks developing. When I mentioned it to my cubicle neighbor Vera, she shrugged. "That's how it works here," she said quietly. "Ideas flow upward, credit stays at the top." The first time I saw my exact words in Broderick's board presentation, my stomach dropped. He'd taken my cryptocurrency analysis and presented it as his breakthrough research. The board loved it. He got a bonus. I got a generic team effort mention. I confronted him privately. "Broderick, that crypto analysis was my work." He looked confused. "Quinlan, you work for me. Your work is department work, but you didn't mention my name." His expression hardened. "Are you questioning my leadership? Because if you're not happy here?" I backed down. I needed this job, but it kept happening. My fraud detection algorithm became Broderick's innovative protocol. My client retention strategy became Broderick's revolutionary approach. Month after month, I watched him climb using my ideas. The breaking point came during annual reviews. I'd spent 3 months developing a comprehensive risk assessment model that could save millions. It was my masterpiece. Complex algorithms, predictive analytics, stress testing scenarios I'd never seen attempted. I submitted it to Broderick, as always. 2 weeks later, the CEO announced Broderick's promotion to vice president for his groundbreaking risk management innovation. My innovation. At the celebration party, I watched Broderick accept congratulations for work that had consumed my evenings and weekends. When the CEO asked him to explain the methodology, Broderick stumbled through a surface-level description, proving he barely understood what I'd created. "Brilliant work, Broderick," the CEO said. That night, I made a decision. I started keeping detailed records, screenshots of original files with timestamps. Most importantly, I began adding something special to every report. Hidden in the metadata of each document, embedded in my spreadsheets, I planted digital fingerprints. Nothing that would affect the work itself. The analysis remained sound. But buried in the technical infrastructure were signatures that could prove authorship beyond doubt. I called them Easter eggs. For 6 months, I continued feeding Broderick my work while secretly documenting everything. He kept taking credit, kept getting promoted, kept treating me like a disposable intern. But now I had a plan. The opportunity came when Broderick announced he was presenting our yearly performance analysis to the board. It would be broadcast to all employees and potential investors. "This presentation could make or break our funding," he told the team. I spent 2 weeks on the most comprehensive analysis I'd ever created. Market projections, risk assessments, competitive analysis, everything the board needed for crucial decisions. And embedded throughout every component were my Easter eggs. But this time, I added something extra. Deep in the code, scheduled to activate during the presentation, I planted a surprise that would make absolutely certain everyone knew whose work they were really seeing. The morning of the board meeting, I submitted my report to Broderick with a smile. "This might be your best work yet, Quinlan," he said, barely glancing at it. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main conference room. All department heads would be there, along with the CEO, board members, and several high-profile investors considering a major funding round. The entire company would watch via live stream. But let me back up. You need to understand how I got to this point, because the road to revenge isn't something you stumble onto by accident. It requires patience, planning, and a level of strategic thinking that most people reserve for chess masters or military generals. My journey to Meridian Financial started 4 years earlier, during my senior year at State University. I was that student who lived in the computer lab, the one who got genuinely excited about statistical models and data visualization. While my friends were out partying, I was building predictive algorithms for fun. My professors kept telling me I had a gift for seeing patterns that others missed. Professor Martinez, who taught my advanced analytics course, was the one who recommended me for the Meridian position. "Quinlan has an intuitive understanding of data that I've rarely seen in 20 years of teaching," she wrote in her recommendation letter. "She doesn't just crunch numbers, she makes them tell stories." The irony of that statement would become painfully clear later. I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in data science and economics, carrying student loan debt that felt like a small mortgage and dreams that seemed worth every penny. The job market was competitive, but I had internship experience, glowing recommendations, and a portfolio that showcased everything from market prediction models to social media sentiment analysis. When Meridian Financial called for an interview, I researched the company obsessively. Founded in 1987, they'd built their reputation on conservative investment strategies and steady growth. Recently, they'd begun expanding into emerging markets and alternative investments, exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach that excited me. The office impressed me immediately. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the financial district, modern workstations buzzed with activity, and the break room coffee machine looked like it belonged in a high-end cafe. This was the kind of place where serious professionals did important work. Broderick Hawthorne was 42, impeccably dressed, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. During the interview, he asked intelligent questions about my forecasting methodologies and nodded approvingly at my responses. When I presented my senior thesis project, a model that predicted market volatility using social media sentiment, he seemed genuinely impressed. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Traditional financial analysis is becoming obsolete. The future belongs to people who can synthesize diverse data sources and identify trends before they become obvious." He offered me the position on the spot, junior analytics associate, with a starting salary that would allow me to begin paying down my loans and maybe even afford my own apartment instead of the cramped studio I shared with 2 roommates. "Welcome to the team, Quinlan," he said, shaking my hand with what seemed like genuine warmth. "I have a feeling you're going to do great things here." The first few months were everything I'd hoped for. Broderick assigned me interesting projects, analyzing market trends in renewable energy, evaluating the risk profiles of emerging cryptocurrency exchanges, developing models to predict client behavior during market downturns. The work was challenging, varied, and exactly the kind of cutting-edge analysis I dreamed of doing. My cubicle was in a pod with 3 other junior associates: Vera, who'd been there 2 years and specialized in regulatory compliance; Cameron, a recent MBA who focused on merger and acquisition analysis; and Destiny, who handled client portfolio optimization. We quickly became a tight-knit group, sharing lunch breaks and collaborating on complex projects. Vera was the first to warn me about the office politics, though I didn't understand what she meant at the time. "Just be careful about how much credit you expect for your work," she said one day, as we waited for sandwiches at the deli across the street. "The hierarchy here is pretty rigid." "What do you mean?" I asked. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Ideas tend to get absorbed as they move up the chain. That compliance framework I developed last year, Broderick presented it to the board as his innovation. I got a nice performance review, but he got the recognition. I was naive enough to think this was just standard corporate structure. Junior employees did the legwork, senior managers got the glory. That was how business worked, right? The first red flag should have been the cryptocurrency analysis. I'd spent 3 weeks diving deep into the emerging digital currency market, analyzing everything from Bitcoin's price volatility to the regulatory environment surrounding DeFi protocols. The report I produced was comprehensive: 87 pages of market analysis, risk assessment, and investment recommendations. I'd identified several promising opportunities while flagging potential regulatory pitfalls that could devastate unprepared investors. When I submitted the report to Broderick, he seemed genuinely excited. "This is outstanding work, Quinlan. Really sophisticated analysis. I can see why Professor Martinez recommended you so highly." 2 weeks later, during the monthly board meeting, I watched via livestream as Broderick presented his breakthrough analysis of cryptocurrency investment opportunities. He used my exact methodology, cited my research sources, and presented my conclusions as his own insights. The only difference was the title slide, which credited Broderick Hawthorne, Director of Strategic Analytics. The board was impressed. CEO Mitchell Walsh specifically praised the thoroughness of the analysis and the sophistication of the risk modeling. Board member Elena Voss called it exactly the kind of forward-thinking research that sets Meridian apart from our competitors. At the end of the presentation, Broderick mentioned that his team had provided valuable support in gathering data. That was it. Valuable support. I felt sick. When I approached Broderick after the meeting, he seemed genuinely surprised by my concern. "Quinlan, you did excellent work on that project. I made sure to mention the team's contributions. But you didn't mention my name specifically. That was my research, my analysis, my conclusions." He sighed. "The way you might with a child who doesn't understand why they can't have ice cream for dinner. That's not how these things work in the corporate world. When you work for someone, your contributions become part of their deliverables. I'm responsible for the quality and accuracy of everything my department produces, so naturally I present the results. But the board thinks you personally developed that analysis. I supervised its development. I provided guidance and direction. That makes me accountable for the final product." His tone was becoming impatient. "Look, you're young, and I understand this might feel unfair, but this is standard practice in professional environments. Your work will be recognized through performance reviews and advancement opportunities." I wanted to argue, but something in his expression warned me not to push further. This wasn't a discussion. It was a lesson in how power worked at Meridian Financial. The next few months followed a pattern that became depressingly familiar. I'd submit detailed analysis on complex topics: healthcare technology investments, environmental impact bonds, foreign currency hedging strategies. Broderick would present these insights to various stakeholders, always framing them as his own work, while relegating my contributions to anonymous team efforts. Meanwhile, my direct colleagues began sharing their own stories of stolen credit. Cameron had developed an innovative merger evaluation model that Broderick now used in client presentations. Destiny's portfolio optimization algorithm had become Broderick's revolutionary approach to asset allocation. Even Vera's compliance framework was being marketed to other firms as a Meridian innovation developed by our department leadership. "It's not just Broderick," Vera explained during one of our lunch conversations. "This happens throughout the company. Junior staff does the actual work, middle management takes the credit, senior leadership gets the bonuses." "But doesn't that make you angry?" I asked. She shrugged. "Anger doesn't pay my student loans. Besides, what are we going to do? File a complaint with HR, they'll just say we're not team players and find reasons to let us go. Cameron nodded grimly. I saw it happen to someone in the mergers department. He complained about credit attribution, and suddenly his work quality was being questioned. He was gone within 3 months. The message was clear. Keep your head down, do good work, and hope that competence would eventually be rewarded with advancement. Fighting the system would only hurt your career prospects. For a while, I tried to convince myself they were right. This was just how corporate America worked. I was gaining valuable experience, building my resume, and learning from seasoned professionals. The specific attribution of individual contributions mattered less than the overall growth of my skills and knowledge. But then came the risk assessment model. This project was different from anything I'd tackled before. Instead of analyzing a specific market sector or investment opportunity, Broderick asked me to develop a comprehensive framework for evaluating institutional risk across all of Meridian's holdings. It was the kind of meta-analysis that required advanced statistical modeling, sophisticated algorithms, and months of intensive research. This could be a game changer for how we approach portfolio management, Broderick told me when he assigned the project. I need you to think big picture here. Don't just focus on traditional metrics. Consider everything from geopolitical stability to climate change impacts to social media sentiment. I threw myself into the work with an intensity that worried my friends and family. I spent evenings and weekends in the office, building predictive models that could process thousands of variables simultaneously. I developed new ways to quantify previously subjective risk factors, created visualization tools that could present complex data in intuitive formats, and stress-tested my algorithms against historical market crashes to ensure their reliability. The breakthrough came on a Saturday night around 11 p.m., when I finally cracked the code for weighting different risk factors based on their historical correlation with market performance. The model could now predict potential losses with 94% accuracy across different time horizons, a significant improvement over existing industry standards. I spent another month refining the system, documenting my methodology, and preparing comprehensive user guides so other analysts could implement the framework effectively. The final deliverable was a 200-page technical manual accompanied by interactive software tools that I'd coded from scratch. When I presented the completed model to Broderick, his reaction was everything I'd hoped for. Quinlan, this is extraordinary work. Absolutely extraordinary. This could revolutionize how we think about risk management. He scrolled through the documentation with obvious excitement. The board is going to love this. This is exactly the kind of innovation that positions Meridian as an industry leader. I felt a surge of pride and anticipation. This wasn't just another routine analysis. This was genuinely groundbreaking work that could transform how financial institutions approached risk assessment. Surely, work of this caliber would earn proper recognition. 2 weeks later, CEO Walsh called an all-hands meeting to announce Broderick's promotion to Vice President of Strategic Analytics. Broderick has demonstrated exceptional leadership and innovation during his time as director, Walsh announced to the assembled company. His groundbreaking work on institutional risk assessment represents exactly the kind of forward-thinking analysis that will drive Meridian's continued success. I watched in stunned silence as Walsh described my risk assessment model as Broderick's revolutionary framework and praised his sophisticated understanding of complex market dynamics. The presentation slides showed my algorithms, my visualizations, my methodology, all credited to Broderick Hawthorne's visionary leadership. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, stock options, and a corner office with views of the harbor. At the celebration party that evening, investors and board members congratulated Broderick on his innovative thinking and analytical brilliance. When Elena Voss asked him to explain the technical details of his risk assessment methodology, I held my breath. This was the moment when his superficial understanding would be exposed, when the truth about who actually developed the model would become obvious. Broderick smiled confidently and launched into an explanation that hit all the right buzzwords while completely missing the underlying mathematical principles. He talked about multivariable correlation analysis and dynamic risk weighting without demonstrating any understanding of how these concepts actually functioned in practice. But the audience didn't know enough about advanced analytics to spot the gaps in his knowledge. They heard confident explanations peppered with technical terminology and assumed they were listening to a brilliant innovator rather than a skilled presenter reciting talking points. That night, I went home to my tiny apartment and sat on my futon, staring at the wall for hours. This wasn't just standard corporate hierarchy anymore. This was outright theft of intellectual property. Broderick hadn't simply presented my work under his supervision, he'd claimed personal credit for innovations that he couldn't even explain properly. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. Saw the company announcement online? So exciting that your boss got promoted. I bet you're learning so much from someone that innovative. I turned off my phone and made a decision that would change the trajectory of my career. The next morning, I started keeping detailed records. Every email, every file version, every timestamp got meticulously documented in a secure cloud storage account that only I could access. I began saving multiple versions of my work at different stages of development, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence showing my authorship of various innovations. But more importantly, I started researching digital forensics and data authentication techniques. During my lunch breaks, I visited the public library to use computers that couldn't be traced back to Meridian's network. I learned about metadata signatures, steganography, and digital watermarking. I I studied legal cases where intellectual property theft had been proven through technical evidence. Most crucially, I discovered that modern document creation software automatically embeds dozens of identifying markers in every file: creation timestamps, user IDs, software versions, even unique identifiers from the computer used for creation. This metadata could prove authorship even if someone copied content into a new document. I began embedding additional identification markers in every report I submitted to Broderick. Nothing that would affect the analysis itself. The numbers remained accurate. The conclusions remained valid. But buried in the technical infrastructure of each document were digital signatures that could definitively prove my authorship. I called them Easter eggs, though they were more like insurance policies. The technique was surprisingly simple. In spreadsheet formulas, I included comments that weren't visible in normal view, but could be found by anyone who knew where to look. In my written reports, I used specific formatting codes that created invisible watermarks. In my software code, I added comment lines that spelled out my name when read in sequence. For 6 months, I continued this double life. Openly, I remained the dedicated employee, submitting high-quality analysis and accepting Broderick's appropriation of credit with apparent resignation. Privately, I was building an ironclad case that would prove his systematic theft of intellectual property. The other analysts began to notice changes in my behavior, though they misunderstood what those changes meant. "You seem more relaxed lately," Vera observed during one of our lunch breaks. "Less stressed about the whole credit thing." "I've been thinking about what you said," I replied carefully. "About how this is just how the industry works. No point fighting the system." Cameron nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Keep your head down, do good work, and eventually you'll move up to where you can be the one presenting the results." If only they knew what I was actually planning. The opportunity for revenge came during Meridian's annual strategic planning cycle. Each department was required to present comprehensive analyses of their sector's performance, along with detailed projections for the coming fiscal year. These presentations were crucial for determining budget allocations, staffing decisions, and investment priorities. Broderick announced that he would be presenting our department's analysis to the full board of directors, along with several potential investors who were considering a major funding round that could determine Meridian's expansion plans for the next 5 years. "This presentation will be the most important thing our department does all year," he told our team during the initial planning meeting. "The board is facing some difficult decisions about resource allocation, and our analysis will directly influence those choices." He looked around the room, making eye contact with each of us. "I need everyone's absolute best work on this. We have 6 weeks to prepare the most comprehensive strategic analysis this company has ever seen." The irony wasn't lost on me. Broderick needed our best work, but he would present it as his own innovations while we watched anonymously from the sidelines. I volunteered to coordinate the overall analysis, which meant I would be responsible for integrating everyone's contributions into a cohesive final presentation. Broderick was delighted by my initiative. "Perfect, Quinlan. Your organizational skills and analytical capabilities make you the ideal person to synthesize everything into a compelling narrative." What he didn't realize was that this coordination role would give me access to every component of the presentation, allowing me to embed my Easter eggs throughout the entire document rather than just my individual contributions. Over the next 6 weeks, I worked with each team member to develop their sections of the analysis. Cameron provided merger and acquisition projections. Destiny analyzed portfolio optimization opportunities. Vera ensured all recommendations complied with current regulations. I contributed comprehensive risk assessments, market trend analysis, and strategic recommendations. As the individual sections came together, I began weaving my digital signatures throughout the entire presentation. Not just in my own work, but embedded in the underlying structure of the document itself. The metadata would show that every major component had been created or significantly modified by me. The formatting codes would spell out my name when viewed with the right software. The embedded comments would create an undeniable trail of authorship. But I wasn't satisfied with passive proof of my contributions. This presentation was going to be broadcast live to the entire company, with potential investors watching remotely. If I was going to expose Broderick's fraud, I needed something more dramatic than hidden metadata. That's when I developed the activation protocol. Deep in the presentation software's scripting language, I embedded code that would remain dormant until triggered by a specific sequence of slide advances. When Broderick reached slide 15, which contained market projections that I had personally developed, the script would activate and begin displaying evidence of the presentation's true authorship. The beauty of the system was its inevitability. Broderick couldn't skip slide 15 without derailing his entire presentation flow. He couldn't know about the embedded script because it was written in code that he didn't understand. And once activated, the sequence would run automatically regardless of his attempts to regain control. I spent countless hours testing the activation protocol on my personal laptop, ensuring it would work flawlessly when the moment arrived. The script would display authorship evidence for exactly 90 seconds, long enough to make the point unmistakably clear, but not so long as to seem like a technical malfunction rather than deliberate sabotage. The week before the presentation, I submitted the final version to Broderick with my usual professional demeanor. He reviewed the content with obvious satisfaction, praising the thoroughness of the analysis and the clarity of the strategic recommendations. "This is outstanding work, Quinlan. Really outstanding. The board is going to be incredibly impressed." He paused, then added with apparent sincerity, "I want you to know that your contributions to this department haven't gone unnoticed." When this presentation goes well, and I'm confident it will, there will be opportunities for advancement. I smiled and thanked him for his mentorship, all while knowing that his career was about to implode in the most public way possible. The morning of the presentation, I arrived at the office early and positioned myself in the back corner of the main conference room, where I could see both the projection screen and Broderick's face. My laptop was open and ready to document everything that was about to unfold. At exactly 2 p.m., the conference room filled with Meridian's senior leadership, board members, and several high-profile investors whose funding could determine the company's future. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation. Everyone understood that this presentation could make or break several major business initiatives. Broderick looked confident and polished as he stepped up to the podium. His tailored suit was immaculate, his hair perfectly styled, his smile practiced and professional. He carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had never faced consequences for his actions. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began smoothly. "Today, I'm excited to share our department's comprehensive analysis of market conditions and strategic recommendations for the coming fiscal year." The first slide appeared on screen. Strategic Market Analysis, prepared by Broderick Hawthorne, VP Strategic Analytics. My stomach clenched with familiar anger, but I forced myself to remain calm. The real show was still 14 slides away. For the first 10 minutes, Broderick presented my market analysis as his own insights, discussing cryptocurrency trends with authority he'd borrowed from my research, explaining regulatory implications using my compliance framework, and outlining investment opportunities based on my risk assessments. The audience was engaged and impressed. Board members took notes on his recommendations. Investors leaned forward with interest when he described emerging market opportunities. CEO Walsh beamed with obvious pride at his VP's analytical sophistication. Slide by slide, Broderick appropriated months of my work while building his reputation as a visionary strategist. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was excited. In just a few minutes, everyone in that room would understand exactly who had really developed the insights they were applauding. As Broderick clicked to slide 14, I held my breath. One more click would trigger the activation protocol and change everything. "Now, let's examine our quarterly projections in the context of emerging market volatility," Broderick said confidently, advancing to slide 15. The screen went dark for a moment, then displayed a message in bold red letters. "Plagiarism detected. Analyzing authorship." Broderick froze mid-sentence, his confident expression transforming into confusion. He clicked his presentation remote repeatedly, but the message remained on screen. This must be a technical glitch," he stammered, his composure beginning to crack. He fumbled with his laptop, trying to regain control of the presentation, but my script was running independently now. The confused murmurs rippling through the room grew louder as the delay stretched on. After 30 seconds that felt like an eternity, the message changed. "Analysis complete. Original author, Quinlan Torres." The room fell silent. Every eye in the room turned toward Broderick, whose face had gone completely white. Then the real evidence began appearing. The screen displayed a detailed breakdown of the presentation's authorship, showing creation timestamps, metadata signatures, and version histories for every major component. Side-by-side comparisons appeared, showing how Broderick's previous innovations matched my original files down to specific formatting choices and calculation methods. But I wasn't finished. The next phase of my script began displaying email communications that I'd carefully preserved. Messages where Broderick explicitly claimed credit for my work. Internal memos where he described my innovations as his personal breakthroughs. Performance reviews where he rated my contributions as merely adequate, while simultaneously presenting my research to upper management as groundbreaking insights. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Month after month of systematic intellectual property theft, documented with the kind of meticulous detail that would satisfy any court of law. CEO Walsh stood up slowly, his face dark with fury. "Broderick, are you telling me that for the past 18 months, you've been presenting this employee's work as your own?" "Sir, I can explain," Broderick began desperately. "Can you?" Walsh's voice cut through the room like ice. "Because what I'm seeing here is pretty clear documentation of systematic fraud." The investors began whispering among themselves with obvious concern. This was exactly the kind of internal chaos that could derail funding negotiations and raise serious questions about Meridian's management culture. Board member Elena Voss leaned forward with laser focus. "Mr. Hawthorne, can you explain the methodology behind the risk assessment model you presented last quarter?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Broderick opened his mouth, then closed it again. He'd never understood the technical details of my work. He'd always just copied my conclusions into prettier presentations without grasping the underlying mathematical principles. The technical aspects were developed collaboratively," he said weakly. "By collaboratively, you mean stolen," said another board member bluntly. The screen wasn't finished with its revelations. My final surprise began loading, a complete video breakdown of my research and development process for every project Broderick had claimed. The timestamps proved beyond any doubt that every Broderick innovation had actually been created by me, often weeks before he'd even seen the preliminary data. As the video played, showing month after month of my stolen work, Broderick's reputation crumbled in real time. Several investors closed their laptops and began gathering their things, clearly reconsidering their involvement with a company that couldn't manage basic ethical oversight. I think we've seen enough, CEO Walsh said finally, his voice tight with controlled rage. Broderick, you're suspended immediately pending a full investigation. Security will escort you out. As security officers approached, Broderick turned to scan the room desperately, his eyes finally landing on me in the back corner. The realization dawned across his face like a slow-motion car crash. You, he whispered, pointing at me with a trembling finger. You did this. I stood up calmly, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. No, Broderick. You did this when you decided to steal my work for 18 months. The CEO looked at me with newfound interest and something that might have been respect. Ms. Torres, I presume, would you be willing to continue this presentation with your original analysis? I walked to the front of the room as Broderick was escorted out, his protests echoing down the hallway like the wails of a man watching his entire life collapse. With a few quick keystrokes, I disabled my security protocols and returned the presentation to normal. Of course, sir, though I should mention that this analysis reaches some concerning conclusions about our current market position that the previous presenter might have been hesitant to share. For the next hour and a half, I presented my actual work. Not the sanitized version Broderick had been feeding the board, but the complete analysis including risks he'd been too afraid to mention and opportunities he'd been too conservative to pursue. I explained the mathematical principles behind my risk assessment algorithms, demonstrated the predictive accuracy of my market models, and walked through strategic recommendations that went far beyond Broderick's surface-level interpretations. When board members asked technical questions, I answered them with the confidence that comes from truly understanding your subject matter. The difference was immediately apparent. This wasn't a polished presenter reciting talking points. This was the actual innovator explaining her work with genuine expertise and passion. When I finished, the room erupted in questions and discussion. The investors were back to taking notes enthusiastically. Board members wanted deeper dives into specific aspects of my forecasting models. CEO Walsh looked like he'd discovered a diamond mine hidden in his own backyard. Ms. Torres, Elena Voss said during the Q&A session, this is the most sophisticated and comprehensive analysis we've seen in years. How long have you been developing these methodologies? About 18 months, I replied, letting the timeline implications hang in the air. Though until today, they were being presented under someone else's name. The investigation that followed was swift and merciless. HR reviewed every document, every presentation, every claim Broderick had made during his tenure at Meridian. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just my hidden signatures and metadata, but testimony from other team members who'd witnessed the systematic theft, email records showing his pattern of appropriation, and technical analysis, proving he lacked the skills to create the work he'd claimed. Vera, Cameron, and Destiny all came forward with their own stories of stolen credit, providing additional evidence of Broderick's fraudulent behavior. It became clear that his entire career advancement had been built on appropriating other people's innovations. The legal department got involved when they realized the extent of the intellectual property theft. Broderick had been presenting stolen work not just internally, but to clients and potential partners, potentially exposing Meridian to liability if the true authorship ever came to light. 3 days after the disastrous presentation, Broderick was terminated for cause. The company announced they were pursuing legal action to recover the bonuses and salary increases he'd received based on fraudulent claims of innovation. His corporate accounts were frozen pending the outcome of the investigation, but the real vindication came in the form of an unexpected knock on my cubicle wall. Ms. Torres? It was CEO Walsh himself, flanked by Elena Voss and 2 other board members. Could we have a word? In Walsh's expansive corner office, with its panoramic views of the financial district, I sat across from Meridian's senior leadership while they offered me an opportunity that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. Quinlan, may I call you Quinlan? What happened this week has been eye-opening for all of us, Walsh began. Not just the plagiarism, but the quality of work you've been producing. Your presentation to the board was extraordinary. Elena Voss leaned forward. We've been reviewing your contributions over the past 18 months, and frankly, we're amazed by the sophistication of your analysis. The risk assessment model alone could revolutionize how we approach portfolio management. The board has asked me to offer you Broderick's position, Walsh continued, Vice President of Strategic Analytics, with a salary adjustment that reflects your actual contributions to the company's success. My heart raced. This was beyond anything I dared to hope for when I started planning my revenge. Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I should mention that I'm only 26 years old. I'm not sure I have the experience. Experience? Walsh interrupted with a slight smile. You've been doing the work of a VP for 18 months. The only difference is that someone else was taking credit for it, Elena Voss added. We're also implementing new protocols to ensure proper attribution of work throughout the organization, and we'd like you to review the past 18 months and identify any other instances where your contributions weren't properly recognized. There will be retroactive compensation. The amount they mentioned made my eyes widen. It wasn't just back pay. It was recognition that my work had generated millions in value for the company, value that had been attributed to Broderick's fraudulent claims. But I need to understand something, Walsh said, his expression becoming more serious. Why didn't you come forward sooner? We could have addressed this months ago through proper channels. I considered my response carefully. Honestly, sir, I tried. When I first noticed the pattern, I spoke to Broderick directly. He made it clear that questioning his methods could cost me my job. As a recent graduate with substantial student loans, I couldn't afford to take that risk. The board members exchanged glances. Walsh nodded grimly. That's exactly the kind of toxic management culture we need to eliminate. Your approach, documenting everything and waiting for the right moment, showed remarkable strategic thinking. Though I have to ask, Elena Voss said with curiosity, how long were you planning that presentation trap? The embedded scripts, the metadata signatures, that wasn't something you threw together overnight. I smiled. 6 months of active planning, but 18 months of patient documentation. Over the following weeks, word of Broderick's downfall spread throughout Meridian and beyond. The financial industry is surprisingly small, and news of such a spectacular fraud case travels fast. Several other employees came forward with their own stories of idea theft and credit appropriation, revealing that Broderick's behavior was part of a broader cultural problem within the company. The board launched a comprehensive review of management practices, implementing new protocols for project attribution and intellectual property protection. They established an anonymous reporting system for employees to flag potential theft of credit or ideas. Most importantly, they created clear advancement pathways that rewarded actual innovation rather than political maneuvering. My new office, Broderick's former corner office with harbor views, became a symbol of what merit-based advancement could look like. Vera stopped by during my first week as VP to congratulate me and share her own good news. I've been promoted to senior compliance analyst, she said with a genuine smile. Apparently, when they reviewed all the collaborative work from our department, they realized I'd been developing some pretty sophisticated frameworks. Cameron and Destiny received similar recognition, along with retroactive compensation for their uncredited contributions. The entire dynamic of our department shifted from competitive credit grabbing to genuine collaboration. But the most satisfying moment came 3 months later, when I received an invitation to speak at the National Conference on Financial Analytics. The conference organizers had heard about Meridian's innovative risk assessment methodologies and wanted me to present my work to industry leaders from across the country. As I prepared for the presentation, I couldn't help but think about how different this felt from watching Broderick appropriate my work. This time, my name would be on the slides. This time, the questions would come to me directly. This time, the recognition would go where it belonged. The conference was held at a luxury hotel in Chicago, with over 500 attendees representing major financial institutions, regulatory agencies, and academic research centers. My presentation was scheduled for the main auditorium during the afternoon keynote slot, prime real estate for reaching the most influential audience. As I stood backstage reviewing my notes one final time, I spotted a familiar face in the audience through a gap in the curtains. Broderick sat in the back row, having apparently paid his own way to attend the conference. His expensive suit had been replaced by something more modest, and his confident demeanor was gone, replaced by the nervous energy of someone trying to rebuild a shattered reputation. When the conference organizer introduced me as one of the most innovative thinkers in contemporary risk assessment methodology, I walked onto the stage with genuine confidence rather than borrowed authority. The applause was warm and genuine, coming from an audience that respected actual expertise rather than polished presentations. For 45 minutes, I presented my work with the passion and knowledge that comes from deep understanding. I explained the mathematical principles behind my algorithms, demonstrated the predictive accuracy of my models, and shared case studies showing how proper risk assessment had helped Meridian avoid significant losses during recent market volatility. The questions from the audience were sophisticated and challenging, exactly the kind of technical inquiries that would have exposed Broderick's superficial knowledge. But I answered them confidently, drawing on months of hands-on experience with the systems I'd developed. After the presentation, I was surrounded by industry leaders wanting to discuss collaboration opportunities, research partnerships, and consulting arrangements. Business cards were exchanged, follow-up meetings were scheduled, and several universities expressed interest in having me guest lecture on advanced analytics methodologies. During the networking reception that evening, Broderick approached me near the bar. He looked older than when I'd last seen him, with stress lines around his eyes and a hesitant manner that suggested his confidence had been permanently damaged. "Quinlan," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something." I waited, curious about what he could possibly have to say. "How long were you planning that presentation trap? The Easter eggs, the metadata signatures. That level of preparation takes serious commitment." 6 months of active planning, I replied honestly, "but 18 months of patient documentation." He nodded slowly, processing this information. "I deserve what happened to me, I know that. But did you have to destroy my entire career? Couldn't there have been a way to handle this privately?" I looked at him directly, remembering all the times I'd tried to address the credit issue through proper channels, all the dismissive responses and veiled threats about job security. "Broderick, I tried to handle it privately when I first approached you about credit attribution. You made it clear that my job security depended on accepting your theft of my work. But surely, here's what I learned," I continued. "Talent and hard work only matter if you know how to protect them. You taught me that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to make their behavior so publicly undeniable that they can't talk their way out of consequences." He looked away, unable to argue with the logic. "What are you doing now? I heard you got my old position." "I'm doing the same work I was always doing," I said. "The only difference is that now I get credit for it." As he turned to walk away, he called back one more time. "For what it's worth, I'm genuinely sorry, Quinlan. I never meant for things to go that far." I watched him disappear into the crowd of successful professionals networking and sharing ideas, the kind of environment where genuine expertise was valued and rewarded. Apologies are meaningless when they only come after consequences, I said to myself. The rest of the conference was a blur of productive conversations and professional opportunities. I was invited to join editorial boards for academic journals, serve on industry committees developing new regulatory standards, and consult with government agencies on financial stability monitoring. 6 months later, I received a call from my former professor, Dr. Martinez, who had recommended me for the Meridian position. "Quinlan, I've been following your career with great interest," she said. "The work you're doing on risk assessment methodologies is exactly the kind of innovation our field needs." She paused, then continued with obvious excitement. "I'm calling because we have an opening for a visiting professor position. Would you be interested in spending a semester teaching advanced analytics while continuing your research?" The opportunity was tempting, but I'd found my place at Meridian. Under new leadership that valued actual innovation over political maneuvering, the company was becoming the kind of place I'd dreamed of working when I first graduated. "I'm honored by the offer," I told her, "but I'm exactly where I want to be, though I'd be happy to guest lecture occasionally." "Of course. But Quinlan, I have to ask, how did you know things would work out the way they did? The situation with your former supervisor could have backfired spectacularly." I thought about her question for a moment. I didn't know how it would end, but I knew that doing nothing was guaranteed to fail. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to protect what matters to you. A year after Broderick's downfall, Meridian's Strategic Analytics Department had become an industry leader in innovative risk assessment and market prediction. Our methodologies were being adopted by financial institutions worldwide, our research was cited in academic journals, and our staff was regularly invited to speak at professional conferences. The contrast with our previous culture couldn't have been starker. Instead of competing for credit, team members collaborated openly, knowing their contributions would be properly recognized. Instead of hiding innovative ideas from supervisors who might steal them, analysts shared their work freely, understanding that success would be fairly distributed. My own career had evolved beyond anything I could have imagined when I started as a junior analyst. In addition to my VP responsibilities, I'd been elected to the board of the International Association of Financial Risk Managers, appointed to a government advisory committee on systemic risk monitoring, and invited to present research at the Federal Reserve's annual economic symposium. But perhaps the most satisfying development was the mentoring program I'd established for junior analysts. Every new hire in our department was assigned a senior mentor who was explicitly responsible for ensuring their contributions received proper attribution. We tracked project ownership carefully, published internal newsletters highlighting individual achievements, and made career advancement dependent on demonstrated innovation rather than political connections. The program's success attracted attention from other departments and eventually became a company-wide initiative. Meridian's employee satisfaction scores improved dramatically, turnover decreased significantly, and the quality of work increased as people felt empowered to pursue ambitious projects without fear of having their credit stolen. During one of our monthly mentoring sessions, a young analyst named Phoenix reminded me of myself when I first started at Meridian. She was brilliant, hardworking, and passionate about data science, but also naive about office politics and vulnerable to exploitation by unscrupulous supervisors. "I'm worried about something," she confided during one of our one-on-one meetings. "My manager has been presenting my work in department meetings without mentioning my name. When I brought it up, he said that's just how things work in corporate environments." I felt a familiar surge of anger, but this time it was channeled into protective determination rather than personal frustration. "That's absolutely not how things work here," I told her firmly. "Let's schedule a meeting with your manager to clarify attribution expectations." The conversation with Phoenix's manager was brief and decisive. I made it clear that proper credit attribution wasn't optional, that Meridian's policies explicitly protected intellectual property rights, and that any further appropriation of team members' work would result in disciplinary action. "But I've always presented collaborative work as department achievements," the manager protested. "Collaborative work can be presented as department achievements while still acknowledging individual contributions," I explained. "Phoenix developed that forecasting model independently. Her name should be on any presentation that features her work." The manager quickly agreed to update his practices, and Phoenix's contributions began receiving proper recognition. But more importantly, the incident reinforced throughout the company that the old culture of credit theft would not be tolerated under any circumstances. These days, when I walk through Meridian's offices, I see the kind of workplace I wish I'd found when I first graduated from college. Analysts work openly on innovative projects, knowing their efforts will be fairly rewarded. Managers focus on facilitating their team's success rather than appropriating their achievements. Senior leadership makes decisions based on actual performance rather than political connections. The transformation didn't happen overnight, and it required constant vigilance to prevent backsliding into old patterns. But it proved that toxic workplace cultures can be changed when people are willing to take calculated risks to protect what matters to them. My story became something of a legend within the financial industry, though the details often got distorted in retelling. Some versions portrayed me as a vindictive employee who destroyed an innocent manager's career. Others made it sound like I'd single-handedly revolutionized corporate culture through one dramatic presentation. The truth, as usual, was more complicated. I was a young professional who got tired of having her work stolen and decided to do something about it. The methods I used were unconventional, but they were necessary given the power dynamics involved. Traditional channels for addressing credit theft had failed because they relied on the goodwill of the same people who were benefiting from the fraudulent system. Sometimes protecting yourself requires more than following official procedures. Sometimes you have to be willing to document everything, plan meticulously, and wait for the right moment to reveal the truth in a way that can't be ignored or dismissed. The Easter eggs I embedded in my work weren't just technical tricks. They were insurance policies against a system that prioritized political connections over actual achievement. The presentation trap wasn't just revenge, it was a strategic intervention to protect not just my own career, but the careers of everyone else whose work was being systematically stolen. 5 years later, I still receive emails from young professionals asking for advice about credit attribution and workplace politics. Some are dealing with situations similar to what I experienced: supervisors who steal ideas, managers who take credit for subordinates' innovations, organizations that reward presentation skills over actual competence. My advice is always the same: document everything, understand your leverage, and be prepared to take calculated risks when traditional channels fail. Most importantly, remember that tolerating theft of your intellectual property doesn't make you a team player. It makes you an enabler of a corrupt system that hurts everyone except the thieves. Not every situation requires the dramatic approach I used with Broderick, but every situation requires protecting your work and ensuring your contributions receive proper recognition. In a world where careers are built on demonstrated achievement, allowing others to steal credit for your innovations isn't just personally damaging, it's professionally suicidal. The financial industry has changed significantly since my confrontation with Broderick became a cautionary tale about intellectual property theft. Companies now implement stronger protections for individual contributors, and managers understand that appropriating subordinates' work carries serious career risks. But the fundamental dynamics haven't changed entirely. Power still protects itself, and junior employees still face pressure to accept credit theft as the price of career advancement. The difference is that there are now established precedents for fighting back successfully, and organizations understand that tolerating such behavior exposes them to legal and reputational risks. My own career continues to evolve in directions I never could have anticipated when I was a junior analyst documenting Broderick's theft of my work. Last month, I was approached by a publisher interested in turning my experience into a business book about protecting intellectual property in corporate environments. "Your story represents something important about standing up for yourself in professional settings," the editor explained. "But more than that, it shows how individual actions can transform entire organizational cultures." The book proposal sits on my desk, waiting for me to decide whether I want to revisit those experiences in detail. Part of me wants to move forward, rather than dwelling on past conflicts. But another part recognizes that sharing the story might help other people navigate similar challenges. Either way, I know that my confrontation with Broderick was a defining moment that shaped not just my career, but my understanding of how power works in professional environments. The Easter eggs I planted in that final presentation weren't just about exposing one manager's fraud. They were about proving that talent and determination can triumph over political connections and systematic exploitation. Sometimes the best revenge isn't personal satisfaction. It's creating a system where the behavior that hurt you becomes impossible for anyone else to perpetrate. Broderick's downfall was satisfying, but the changes it sparked at Meridian were the real victory. These days, when I review quarterly reports from our analytics team, I see work that's properly attributed, innovations that receive fair recognition, and careers that advance based on actual merit rather than stolen credit. The Easter eggs I embedded in my own work have become part of a larger legacy, a workplace where intellectual property is protected and individual contributions matter. That's the kind of revenge that actually changes things.